Ready to hit the pause button on your parenting fails? Ready to feel better about your parenting? Welcome to Parenting Pause, the podcast, where all of you is welcome and where you can listen in on how other parents became the parents they always dreamed of being. I'm Leslie Potter, the founder of the Pure Joy Parenting Way. I'm a mother, a parenting coach, and a fellow traveler on this journey to wake up in our parenting. And I believe together we can make this a better world for ourselves and our kiddos. Today, Nisansala joins me from Australia. She has 2 children, a boy aged 7 and a girl almost 5. Raised in a more traditional home, she found herself falling into old familiar patterns, which reminded her of her childhood. Knowing she wanted to show up in a more conscious way led her to me to get support to be the parent she wanted to be. Hello, love. Thank you for joining me today.
Hi, Leslie. It's good to be here.
And share with us a little bit of your experience of early childhood and how you were parented.
I guess I'm from like a South Asian background, so very authoritarian parenting. I was raised, the dad is the authority and the mum sort of listens to the dad, and we sort of didn't communicate with the dad. Everything was through mum. Um, Quite an intellectual family, so it was a little bit odd in that we spoke a lot about, how the world should be and how human beings are, a bit of psychology and Buddhism and things like that. But on a practical level, it didn't kind of come out that way. We were quite, I feel, repressed emotionally. We didn't speak our minds, couldn't say no, had to do what we were told, were very controlled and brought up to respect the parents, and the children were only to be seen and not heard type of thing. So it was quite academic as well. We were taught to, have to study and get a good job and go to university, and it was that sort of environment at home. So the biggest piece, I guess, and I realised later on after I had kids, was the emotion part. Like there was no talk about emotions. There was talk maybe, but there was no acknowledgement when it was really happening for you. It was don't cry. And as I grew up, I guess I just tended to really stick to myself and just keep it all inside, not talk about how I felt. And there was a lot of conflict at home, but it was this sort of odd, as we grew up, I remember sort of trying to talk back, and sometimes we did, but it was always that feeling of, in the end, no, mum was right or dad was right, and you don't get to have a say. So there was kind of a lot of yelling and arguments as well, and it wasn't so bad that we were punished or hit or anything like that. It was just sort of more the emotional side of things. We just learned to keep it all in, and not express how we felt.
So when you became a parent, then what did you begin to notice? What, made you start going, whoa, this doesn't feel so good, because you had this template and this style?
It really quite started when my daughter was born. He and my son at the time was just over 3, and I just suddenly started raging, and it was a lot of rage and anger, and it was all sort of directed at my son for some reason I couldn't figure out. And after a few months of just finding myself out of control and not liking what I was doing or being, I started reading a lot of books on parenting, and I ended up doing like a parenting course, which was teaching a lot about how to have connection and relationship with the child, and lots of tools about playing with them and having special time, and like a little bit of behavioral aspects. And I remember there was this one topic in that course that was about self-regulation, but it was a very small topic. And I kind of cottoned on to, oh, that's the missing piece here for me. But it never really taught me how to self regulate. So I was using all these tools to sort of connect and play with my son, but it wasn't helping with the rage, and it wasn't helping with what was going on with me. I kind of hear things coming out of my mouth that was just exactly how my dad would talk or how my parents were talking to me, and I just didn't like it. In my mind I was like, that's not how I wanted to parent. I don't want to have the relationship with my kids similar to what I had with my parents, because as I grew up I just hid things from them, and I was secretive, and I didn't tell them things, and I didn't have a relationship. I was sort of doing this course that was teaching me how to have a relationship with my kids, but I'd make an effort to play with them, but I really didn't want to play with them. I just didn't want to be there. I didn't want to do those things. I just wanted to sort myself out, and I just didn't understand what was going on there.
I
Yeah.
think this is such a beautiful story that you're telling because I think this happens to so many of us. You're describing so beautiful how our family legacy kind of comes down with us, even though we may have this idea we're going to be very different and conscious. And yet, when we get triggered, which you were talking about with your son, and this rage begins to get activated, it gets really scary. Imagine it was really scary for you because, as you say, all of a sudden, here's my dad's voice, and that wasn't what I thought was going to come. But I always like to tell parents, why not? Why weren't you expecting that? Because that's your template, right? That's what you knew to do, especially when you get triggered. So I hear the beautiful part of your story is that who you really wanted a relationship with was you. Right, and that's what you weren't taught in the family legacy. It's not that your parents were bad or wrong or didn't do it right. It's that they didn't know how to have that relationship with their internal being. And so they were taught parenting was all about control, it was all about behavioral mod. So what I'm hearing for you is that there was so much pain for you in how you were relating to your son, and I like to tell people he was holding a part of you, and he was the location of a part of you that you weren't able to have a relationship with. So let's break that down a little bit because I know that's a big statement for people. They're probably going, "What do you mean? Are my kids in the location?" But when we look at what your son was holding, I know for you, he was holding a lot of the sensitivity and a lot of the maybe neediness. Maybe you can talk about this a little bit more for us. But what was he the location of, like the traits that he had that you were so enraged with or, brought up so much vulnerability in you?
Yeah, at the time I didn't see it, but over time and as I've worked with you, Leslie, I've come to realize more and more how much like me he is, especially as a child. And I think what I've learned as I've done this work is that he was pretty much showing me as a mirror all the places that I was reacting out as a child. And he's a very sensitive, sweet soul as well. And I guess unconsciously, I was seeing how he was in the world, and I was trying to teach him not to be that way, but I didn't know that I was doing that. So I was giving him strategies and tools to be like me. And the perfect example of that was, I mentioned it before, like the don't cry thing, because he would cry at the smallest thing, what I perceived to be not a big deal was a big deal for him. And I didn't know how to handle that at all. And I remember that was a big part of what sort of led me to you, because something would set him off, and he'd be having such in my mind at the time, an overreaction to it. And to me, I was like, that's not a big deal. And I think I've learned as I've done this work that, oh, I was taught very early on not to have a reaction, that it was okay. I was strong, and I didn't need to have a big cry about it. I didn't need to be sad about it. I would get over it and sort of stop the tears, and stop the emotional reaction and suppress it. So I was doing that exact same thing to him, and I'm teaching him that, you didn't need to cry about this. You'll be okay. Come on, buck up. Let's get on with it. And of course he didn't take to that at all, and he showed me otherwise. And my reaction to that when he didn't was obviously to rage at it. And at the time when this was all happening, I had a newborn as well, so I was, day to day life was pulling me in all directions, and I didn't have time to deal with this, and the baby was, waiting for me. So I felt like I was really sort of ruining the relationship I had with my boy.
I want to really make this point for mamas and papas who are listening. It's so innocent, as you say. I saw a part of my young self in my son, meaning he was a location. And innocently, I wanted to teach him the strategies that I used to survive. Right? I mean, it's just such an innocent thing. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm seeing that. And it's like, you got to learn to not cry. And, but the thing is, he wasn't being raised in your home with your mother and dad. Right. So this is where I tell people the conflict comes in because we're saying we want to be conscious and conscious. We say, I want to create a environment where my children can express and where I can have a relationship. I mean, it all sounds so good. And then they exhibit that part of us. And the first thing we do, I mean, it's like almost instant when we get triggered, is innocently, we try to, say, you're going to get in trouble. Don't get in trouble. I got to help you. And so I think it's so hard because we are conflicted, as you say. I wanted to create that environment. I knew I did. I didn't like it as a child. I wanted to say, express. But when it actually happened, my favorite blog post was, I'm raising a girl to say no, just not to me. Right. So even though I had all these wonderful ideas of how I wanted to consciously create another environment, I didn't have a relationship with that younger part of me. I was still telling her, and just like you were still telling that younger part of you, it's not okay to cry. You got to be safe. You got to, buck up.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. It's pretty powerful. I found that I could not give to my daughter what I didn't give to myself. So I had to literally consciously go back and reparent myself. And I got to do that through the reflection of my daughter. And I think this is what happened for you too. I remember when you first came, you were telling me about when he would fall down or he would hurt himself, that he would just have such a massive, reaction, and how hard that was to contain or to be with. So, what's it like today? Because I know he's still a sensitive boy, and you have been. I mean, you've been in group for a couple of years here. So, you've been in a container where you've been reparenting yourself, building that relationship. So, what's it like today with him? Maybe you could give us an example.
Yeah, so he would, but as a toddler, if he hurt himself, or he saw a little scrape on his knee or something like that, he would have such a big reaction. And I found like I could put up with it for a while, and then it would go on and on and on. I'd sort of lose patience. And I still remember that first time sort of talked about this topic, and you gave me some strategies to use and to, in those moments, to be with myself, sort of not to think about him and what's happened to him, but just to sort of put my hand on my own heart and be with myself. And those sorts of things sort of really put me into the mode of becoming aware of where I was in these sorts of triggering situations. And I remember the first time I was actually able to do it, and it was very hard initially. So he'd have a big reaction, and I'd sit there, I'd be close to him, and instead of doing my usual soothing, which felt a bit fake, especially after the first few minutes, I just sat there with my hand on my own heart and sort of tried to be with my own young self, who was not taken care of the way a child should have been taken care of. There was this immediate difference in him, as just by me being there with my mouth closed, because normally I would just lecture or talk to him. And now I was basically being with myself and being silent and just making a few sort of comforting noises type thing. And he would have such a different reaction. He would calm down much quicker. He would come over for some cuddles, and it was just a different dynamic altogether. And at the end of it, I wouldn't go into feeling shame and guilt over how I handled it as well. So, yeah, we still have those instances now, and I'm able to allow him to have his tears, and he comes out of it much better or quicker. I think he feels much more acknowledged. And yeah, I mean, it's still sometimes it's still a struggle because kids don't have their moments when it's convenient for us. And
Well, what you're describing is, this is the safe seat process that I created in this model that Nisansala is talking about. And you can always go to the website and download a free copy of that. But the theory of the safe seat is Nisansala was including herself also. So when she was just trying to be the good mother or the mother, and she wasn't aware of her internal experience arising, and, because she was really triggered, when she wasn't able to include herself, that's when it got so intense for her with her son, because all of her techniques were to try to get him to stop so you would be okay. So as you begin to learn to safe seat, as you're describing, I became a safe place. I put my hand on my heart. I included the fear in myself and the one that was really having a hard time and feeling quite vulnerable. And therefore, I didn't avoid, I didn't try to control, I didn't try to time out, I didn't try to get him to be done with it, I didn't try to fixing all of the old, models to get to repress the behavior or the feeling. And you were able to just stay with yourself. And therefore, he felt the safety of you staying with yourself. And so he knew he could stay with himself. And this is magic. And it is the hardest thing that you will almost ever do. I know you even said right now, Nisantala, you said, I allow him to have his feelings, right? And we still go back to that, thinking that we can allow or not allow. Right? So it's not that we allow them to have their feelings, it's that I don't try to repress their feeling, right?
yeah,
So I'm going to stay with mine, and we're both going to be with reality. And the reality is there's really big feelings in the field in this moment, and I'm not going to run away. I'm not going to avoid. I'm not going to get rid of them, and therefore be a safe base for my son.
yeah. The side thing that came out of it as well is that triggering feeling over his reaction, particularly to like the scrapes and bruises and blood and things like that, is I find myself getting less triggered by it. So it's not such a big deal for me anymore. So that maybe it means that trigger for me is sort of getting healed as well. Maybe, I don't know, but
Well, I think you just have the capacity now to stay with yourself. I mean, or you're choosing to. You've always had that capacity, but as children, we weren't able to. So as an adult, by doing your safe seat process, you know now that you have that capacity. And sometimes we still don't choose, like you said, when I'm in a hurry or whatever, I was just like, stop crying, right? It still happens. But
yeah,
at least you know you have the choice now because you do know you have the capacity. You can stay with it. I'm not saying it's comfortable. I want parents to know it's not very comfortable sometimes, but you're making an adult choice now to stay with yourself and therefore be a safe base for your son.
yeah, yeah.
So we were talking about before we got on a little bit the difference between how you react or respond to your daughter and how you react and respond to your son. And I'd love to just open that topic because I know a lot of people here have, one or two or three or four children. We were talking about that on the group call this week that you seem to have more capacity or more whatever for her and he triggers something different.
Yeah, it does. It's really odd. I don't quite know why. I mean, maybe it's because he, like you said earlier, localizes it for me in a way she doesn't. I don't know if because she's a girl and I relate to being female with her, or she's the youngest, although my son, like me, is the oldest. So I was the oldest child as well. I mean, right from day one, she was more in tune with her feelings. And I remember as a baby, she was not so needy. She was quite independent and quite self reliant. She wasn't overly, sensitive in the same way that my son was at the same ages. But as she grew up, she was more able to express herself. I guess I find that when she has her moments of tears and emotion, I have a different reaction to how I have with my son. So I'm able to sort of sit with it and really relate to her and acknowledge where she's at. And it happened recently over an incident with her dad, and she ended up, in big tears about it. And I was just able to sit there with her on my lap and cuddle her and really listen to it and not talk too much like I normally do and really acknowledge where she was at. I really get her, and when she's crying, I can just hold her and let her cry. Like, she'll cry, and I'll be fine. Like, I won't find myself triggered. Whereas with him, it's still, I have to sort of really work on and allowing myself to be okay with it. And I don't know why, if it's he's a boy and he's the oldest, and I don't know. I think there's a lot of play into how, I was a girl and I was the oldest. My brother was the youngest, and he got away with things that I couldn't get away with. And sometimes I feel like there's this sibling dynamic going on as well, in that's playing out between my two, and how I was with my brother and how I was parented as a girl and as the oldest.
Well, I love how your mind's trying to figure it out. This is what we do, right? Was it this? Is it that? Is it this? Because the mind always, wants to know. That's the beauty of
Yeah,
our beautiful minds. And yet, what you're describing here, and I want people to know this, that you are going to have different relationships. Your children are going to hold different aspects. They are. I just want people to know this, because sometimes we feel like you could have thought that your older son, that your son was the problem, right? But no, he wasn't the problem. It was this, that you had a relationship, or maybe didn't have a relationship with some of the traits that he was exhibiting, that those were more painful for you.
yeah,
And so, in choosing to build that relationship, as I say, what I love in myself, I love in my daughter. What I hate in myself, I hate in my daughter. And so like I say, when she's the location and I see something in her that I have not liked in myself, or I have judged, or I have learned to repress, then I see it in her, then I want to attack it. It's like an act of self-aggression, but it's really, it goes out toward her, because I think that she has that trait and I don't. I've convinced myself that, I got rid of that. I'm not selfish. That's one of mine. So I see her and I perceive that she's being selfish. I can be pretty wicked, right, to that one. I mean, I've learned not to, because of my work that I do, but inside I can be pretty wicked, selfish and shouldn't think about anybody else, and that's all a self-aggression. So that's why I wanted you to share a little bit. Your children are going to hold locations of different things.
yeah,
And so it's not that one kid's a problem, one kid's difficult. If you are having a hard time with a specific kid, if you will begin to look in the mirror and see, what trait does that child hold that I have inside in a different form, and what kind of relationship do I have with that? As you said with your son, it was more the sensitive, needy part of you.
yeah,
You described it so beautiful. My daughter was self-reliant and independent, and I like that so much more, right?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, because you learned that in your home. That was what got you the goodies, and that dependency and that sensitive one. Ooh, let's get that one underground. Let's put it down there, because it doesn't go so well in my family.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So, anything else you'd like to share with us today? Any other examples of, how it was before? I know people would love to hear how something was before and how it is now.
Yeah, so I think I mentioned how I was so raging and yelling and angry all the time, particularly, in that period after my daughter was born. Once I started doing this work, I slowly started to really connect with myself, and found where that anger was coming from. And I still remember a couple of sessions we had talking about rage, because that was a big one for me at the start. I wouldn't say I've got rage anymore, like the anger still comes up, but it's nothing like how it used to be. And my yelling is so much less. And also my going into feelings of guilt and shame after I've had an episode of yelling is it's so much less. I can really be with myself and allow, be kind to myself and come out of it much quicker, and then able to problem solve and repair, with my kids. But yeah, it's definitely a different dynamic at home, and things have changed a lot. And my husband, who hasn't, done this work, I think he's getting it by observing us all. So different.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
that's one of those fringe benefits, right? And I know you've talked about your relationship with your mother has been changing even.
Yes, yeah. So she's a big part of our lives. She looks after the kids once a week and sometimes on the weekends if we're going out and about. Yeah, I'm able to hold my boundaries, I guess. And she's changed a lot as well over time, I think. But when she has her moments, I'm able to hold to my boundary and not let it send me into a sort of downward depressive sort of spiral where it then used to sort of act out, like I used to then act it out on the kids. And I guess sometimes I still do, but I'm definitely more aware of it happening, and I'm able to sort of realize where it's coming from and that I don't need to play into that as well. So yeah, it's really wide ranging, like in all sorts of relationships, when you find an ability to be kind to yourself and be with yourself and have a relationship with yourself, which is definitely not something I used to do or used to have.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, you had an aggressive relationship with lots of parts of yourself. That's what happens when parts get repressed, when we're told we're mean, we're bad, we're rude, we're selfish, when we're just innocently trying to take care of ourselves. When that happened, we begin to start having a very aggressive relationship with, some of those primal feelings that come up as children. Those primal, vulnerable feelings of powerlessness and rejection and abandonment. I mean, those are really hard feelings to deal with as adults. And,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then as little ones, when, that comes up and we're labeled something, we tend to have quite a lot of aggressions.
It's very hard to
Totally.
uncondition yourself.
It is, of course. I still do. But what I try to tell people, this isn't about perfection. And what I notice now when my daughter and I have something that's in and out really fast, and I know that's true for you too. There's, like I said, there's not a lot of guilt. There's not a lot of shame. There's, I guess, boom, it happens. I get it. I go, oh God, I guess I got triggered. Wow. Okay. I'm going to, step back now and take care of myself. So I want everyone to know in this isn't about getting your kids to be perfect, to act perfectly. It's not about you being perfect. It's about learning these beautiful skill sets of how to actually have an adult relationship with the younger parts of you, and therefore the youngers that you are raising.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here. I so appreciate your commitment to changing the world in this way and offering your children a beautiful, healthy, loving, emotionally safe environment.
Thank you so much, Leslie. Thank you for being here and doing what you do.
Thanks to Nisansala for sharing her exceptional strength to shift her early traditional parenting model to a more conscious, loving one. Parenting Paused is produced by Kim Paletti at Sound Mind Productions. Music by Jan Perchik. You can find the show notes at www.purejoyparenting.com, where you'll get access to the foundational practice of Pure Joy, the safe seat, and find links to relevant topics, as well as a transcription of the show. And if this work inspires you and you would like to practice, come join us in my free Pure Joy Parenting Practice group. You'll find the link in the show notes. Thank you for being here today and listening to the Parenting Pause podcast, your partner and support in finding the joy in yourself and with your children. And remember, if you're about to scream, pause.